Okay, good evening, everybody, and I'm delighted to see we have a full board. Everyone is here, myself included, and I apologize for my absence as the last couple of meetings. It's just a personal note, it's been really fascinating to travel around. I've been to Saudi Arabia, to Dubai, Canada, several places in Europe, and Portland is on the radar screen. People know all about Portland. They know a lot of the good things about Portland, and hopefully we need to make sure that those good things continue and that we learn lessons where we're maybe not doing so well, and we continue to improve where we need improvement. So let's do a quick round of introduction, and first of all, I want to delighted to recognize Liz Paris, our newest board member. And Liz, why don't we just start with you? Just say hello very quickly, and we'll go down the list.
Hello.
Melanie?
Hi, I'm Melanie Yu.
Andy Rowe.
Jerry Howell.
Sherry Salmon.
Michael Mahaffey?
I'm Cal Todd, in case this isn't large enough.
Roger Leachman, back from the Appalachians.
Mark Wilkie.
Tracy Prince.
Eric Simon.
And could I ask those in the
Alan Boston,
room?
Northwest.
Yeah, Alan, starting with that one, and just please briefly
Michael
introduce
Mixachek, a resident of Goose Hollow.
Great, welcome.
Alvin Wilson, resident of Goose Hollow.
Sandy Blank from Neighbors.
John Whipple.
Doretta?
Daniel Solomon, resident of Goose Hollow.
Liz Cooksey, resident of Goose Hollow.
Scott Schaefer, Goose Hollow resident.
Rebecca Fresnell, Board of Trustees here at the MAC.
Dwight Terry, liaison for the MAC to the Goose Hollow neighborhood.
Mary Fetch, MAC, Community Relations Manager.
Dorota Schrock, Neighbors West Northwest.
Welcome, everybody. So we have a fairly light agenda tonight. I think we'll finish fairly quickly. The first item is, does anyone have any comments, or particularly members of the public have any comments or issues they'd like to bring forward? Seeing none? Daniel, do you want to bring something? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to just bring it to your attention on not this one, but the issue right before Portland on the front cover is just about this new MAX line. It's in Southwest Portland, and it's very exciting. That's where I go to, past where I go to church. That's an area that's not been serviced well by the MAC. But there are also concerns, depending on which proposal happened, that it could lead to more gentrification and loss of tons and tons of homes and businesses because of eminent domain.
Great.
Thank you.
And
I just
thank
wanted
you
you
for
to
raising that. Yeah.
make sure that everyone is aware of it. And somehow I feel like some of this in some ways, although I'm not sure exactly how, is somehow interconnected to all the central planning and all the other stuff we've been doing. Although I'm not sure exactly how. It feels like this seems like this is all part of a current strategy that seems to be coming to pass.
So they're talking, if I understand correctly, about connecting at the current terminus at PSU, I believe. And
It looks like
south.
that, yeah, from what I gather. They have
yeah.
a map here, and then going all the way out to Tualatin and
Right.
Bridgeport Village. And
Right. They've been talking about doing that for a long time because Bridgeport Village was never actually identified as an urban center, even though it's obviously become one, and I think that's part of the goal. But really, I think the ultimate goal is to go all the way down to Wilsonville. But anyway, not directly impacting us in Goose Hollow, but obviously part of the larger system of mobility and gentrification, as you said. That's another issue that we need to be looking at. Any other comments, observations? Okay, great. We don't.
Michael, sorry.
Yeah, please.
Two things. One is very popular activity is, and if anyone wants to take some of these are posters for the next cleanup in the neighborhood.
Great.
And we're welcoming the community to come and join us. So if you have a window or anything, if you want to stick it in, it's an early one this time. We do it quarterly, so there's that. So
Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and let us know if you want us to distribute, on we have a new email system or distribution system
Oh,
with
super.
MailChimp that seems to be working a lot
Great,
better.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah, and we can distribute it to our list as well.
And what was your turnout for the last one?
I think it was light. I think the Timbers Army was unable to coordinate it, but we picked up a lot of stuff. It was great. The other thing is we've been talking about this for the last couple of months about safety and security in the neighborhood and Block 7 and such. We continue to meet with the police on safety and security issues. Tomorrow we're meeting with one of the commanders, the watch commander, and just keeping talking about what's happening in the neighborhood to see if we can get some more patrols and things like that. And I know we've talked about having potentially some safety and security training and for the neighborhood as well as our members and employees. So some of that has happened, and we still are looking forward to having some of those sessions. Yes.
Are there any developments on the murder at OCI?
I
Does
don't
anyone
believe so.
know, do you, Cal, you followed that, didn't you, or, well, you know something about it? I guess we haven't heard.
Just had nothing.
Yeah.
No suspect. How did your event go yesterday?
The street fair was lovely, lots of kids, it was a lively sight, so people really enjoyed it. We're now getting ready for the next street event with Goose Holidays.
I just want to say thank you so much for the MAC's attention to safety and security in the neighborhood, because
Yeah.
you're a very powerful organization, and for you guys to help us get more attention to our neighborhood for these issues that we all interact with, it's much appreciated. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and it's our collective neighborhood.
Absolutely, and thank you, and
You're
we can
welcome.
feel the response in that way. Thanks.
We'll keep you apprised. Thank you.
Great. Other comments? Seeing none? So let's go on to old business, and starting with board emails exchanged, if you would please.
I have two to report. Number one, Rachel Clark was on the news talking about the blocked views in Central City 2035, and so she asked, what prompted it was she asked me, what can we do? And so I decided to send a response to the whole board, and I said, because we tried to very strictly adhere to the obligation to not conduct board business out of sight, and that's a public document, and so we want you all to know any discussion that was had on the board. So basically I just said that it's not over until a building is built to block the view, as far as I'm concerned. The two views that have any chance would be to lower heights on Jefferson in order to save the view of the Vista Bridge. With the current heights that have been voted in under Central City 2035, you will literally have to stand underneath the bridge and look up to see the arch of the bridge. It'll be quite a travesty of being boxed in by buildings. And the other view that we were advocating for, even though it's not in Goose Hollow, we believe it's a public amenity, is the last view of Mount Hood from the Willamette River at Salmon Springs Fountain, where the Portland Spirit docks. That, to me, is a social justice issue. We are turning into a city where only people wealthy enough to see the view from their condos or apartments or homes will be able to have those views, and I don't think that's what we all believe in. So I don't see a very good potential for getting those views unblocked, but I believe we should keep working. Every vote, any time on any issue, takes 3 city commissioners. That is what it takes, and if we thought we had 3 commissioners for any of those, we would move forward. So that was one email. The other email I will discuss later on the proposed Kings Hill upzoning.
Okay. Yeah, one quick response to Tracy is that I think a number of things that might not be feasible with this council might be feasible with a future council, particularly if we are activists about making sure we have another kind of council with different representation. So we should always keep in mind the sort of long perspective on these things. So I understand there's some additional old business, Mark, that we need to deal with. We tabled something, this is not on the agenda now, but you mentioned to me that there was something that you tabled from the last meeting.
Yeah, I forgot to tell you when you were sending the draft agenda around, but when I was reviewing the minutes that Cal sent out, it reminded me, but yeah. Two things that we tabled at the last meeting. One of them's already been resolved, but I had a concern that we spent a little bit more on the printer and the paper and the ink that we were really allowed to, but Scott tells me that NW, paid the extra amount, so that was good, because that way I don't have to buy Scott a bunch of beers. And then the other thing is that me and Scott exchanged a few emails between us talking about the location of the printer, because that was put on that was tabled at the last meeting also. And I asked Scott to, if he'd be willing to keep the printer at his house, since he's the technical wizard, and he has agreed to do that. And I personally believe that that's the way to go. But I do know there's, maybe other board members that don't agree with that, so I guess we can go ahead and discuss it now.
I don't see any problem with that, as long as it's, being used for the purpose that it was intended. I mean, we appreciate your storing it, frankly.
Well, I thought initially, I thought initially, one of the purposes of that new printer was so that all of the board members could have access to printing it, and I don't think Scott would appreciate us knocking on his door at 8 p.m. So I did have a couple conversations with people in the neighborhood. OSA, one of them, Oregon Society of Artists, they're going to redo some of their office space, and they said that they might have some room there and might consider giving us access to use of a corner of their office. In return, they're going to share, printer usage. The other person was Angela Crawford of Goose Hollow Business Association, and she has an office around the corner. I haven't seen it, but she was also open to discussing the possibility of letting us store it there for our use, So those are just initial discussions, so we're going to follow up on that and figure it out.
Is there any problem with any of those arrangements?
I kind of do, because we don't really have much of a relationship with them other than kind of once a year for Goose Hollow Days. I think, when I've called Angela, it takes me 2 or 3 days to get her to return my phone call, so I wouldn't feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, I just met her at their meeting to talk about Goose Holidays, and I told her one of the requirements was that we have to have full access at certain, daily, at certain times of the day. So that's one of the, requirements. So she understands that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I still, vote for, I still vote for leaving it in Scott's office. He's there a lot more than Angela, and the artist place that's, barely open, and, anyway.
Oh,
My vote is to leave it with Scott, so he's the guy.
Your office or your home?
The home, it's the same thing.
Oh,
It's the
okay.
same thing. Well, let me just say, I don't mind hosting it at my office. The whole point was to make it publicly accessible and be responsive. So if somebody wants to say, for instance, please make 100 full-color flyers of this, then I'll get the email and I can actually start doing that. Originally, we were thinking actually of doing it at the Legends, but that was news to Cal when I approached that subject. That would actually be really wonderful if, because they have a concierge, we could go in there and then somehow be able to print it. I don't think that's going to work, according to Cal.
I have to say that was a surprise to me. I certainly hadn't mentioned it to
But
anybody in the building.
the other thing is, for a shared printer, that the expensive part about the printer is the ink. And so if we're going to be printing stuff out, once a month, but somebody who we're quote unquote sharing it with is using it every single day, then the ink usage is going to be pretty expensive. And so I think the idea is to kind of retain it as much as possible for Goose Hollow business. And so I think, if it was my preference, I would keep it temporarily, and we would continue to look for a good home for it, because, we're not all gonna live forever in this, and there may be some organization that comes up where it's just a perfect fit, that they're gonna be always accessible, and somebody can go in there and they'll actually even have a computer there where you can like plug in a USB drive and go ahead and print out what you need. They'll have all the supplies. So I certainly don't mind doing it, but my preference was actually house it somewhere else that would be incredibly accessible, but I haven't kind of found that place.
And knowing, my preference is with Scott, because I have had many, many times with our home computer where I can't print something. And I say, Scott, I can't print something. And Scott fixes it so I can print something. So who will we call if it's stored at another place?
What are you gonna call?
Right, and that's why Mark said store it as close to Scott as possible.
Yeah, I suggested 10 feet, but Scott said it had to be at least 15 feet, so, we compromised. But he was worried that the cats were gonna get all like crazy when he rearranged the office, so.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Scott and Tracy, for offering your home. I just think it's very generous of you, and I feel personally very comfortable. You guys are always accessible, unless you're traveling or whatever, and I just thank you for your generosity.
Yeah, and I want people to use it. So again, we have very high quality paper now, full color printing. It's a very high quality printer. So if you need some stuff printed out, for instance, for this meeting or flyers for Goose Holidays, we can't do poster size stuff. It's not quite that good, but other than that, it makes very good copies of stuff. And please ask.
It seems like a good interim solution at least, and, Alan Clausen and I were talking with another former member of the city council some years ago who suggested we really ought to think about neighborhood associations having little places that people can go and meet other people and see things pinned up on the board and have printers that they can use and all these kinds of things. And maybe that's something we can work towards as a more ambitious goal, and have a place somewhere that's like a little nonprofit neighborhood center.
I asked, I think it was either Rachel or Nick Clark about that once, and they don't have space, but I just thought that the Goose Hollow Inn or the Hoff would be a perfect place, but they don't have available.
Well, we'll keep an eye out for that.
Goose Hollow needs a community center.
Yeah.
All neighborhoods need community centers.
Exactly. I think that's what this discussion was about, and what I think other cities have been thinking about, also creating a place where people can go and actually meet other people and share resources and so on. Okay, so is that sufficient? Do we need to take a vote on that, or do we want to just have a sense of the board that?
Is this vote going to be for just temporary until we can, will it be open to coming up with the?
For the time being, I think, is the idea, yeah, right?
Because my only concern, Michael and Scott, is that I appreciate that yes, you're a terrific webmaster, but it's like when we want to just ad hoc print something really quick, we have to go and make sure somebody is home to print it and then give it to us. If it's like a time-sensitive thing, or else we have to schedule it in advance, it's not going to be so convenient.
Well, that's why I thought, maybe something like the Legends, where there's someone always there. But again, with the other options that you provide, there's always going to be that problem that they're not going to be there.
Well, with Oregon Society of Artists, I did explain to the office manager that they would actually have to allow us access, after hours, because they close at 4.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would have to be able to access and then not disturb them while they're conducting business and all that stuff. So it was going to be something worked out that way, like space in exchange for them able, to use our printer too. So that was just initial discussion.
So if it was 11 o'clock, they would say, yeah, here's a key, you can come
No,
on in.
no, it wouldn't be 11, but would you print our stuff at 11?
I'm there, that's the advantage of having an office in my home.
Like Kinko's 21st.
I just wanted to echo what Scott said about ink, though. I just bought some cartridges for my $50 printer. The ink was over $100.
Yeah, that's how they get you.
Yeah, I know, but if they're going to
No, I understand.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, well, let's keep it with you if you don't mind, and we appreciate that for the time being. We'll look into other options.
Yeah, let's look into
as well as
other
that.
options.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great. All right, new business.
Well, I actually just wanted to say,
reach out to underrepresented communities. We have a shameful history in this city, as we all know. That's an incredibly important function, and it should be pursued aggressively. I don't question that for a minute, but I do question the idea of commingling these functions, which makes a hash of both. And I tried very hard to make that point to Suk and her assistant, and frankly, I don't think I got very far. But
The other thing we emphasized was the importance of each neighborhood association feeling a sense of obligation to represent their demographics. Every neighborhood will not be that diverse, some are very diverse, but to represent the demographics, as we have really worked hard to do here in Goose Hollow. Do you have a good representation of the renters you have in your neighborhood? Low-income people, people with disabilities. What are your demographics in your neighborhood, and how does your board membership reflect that? And we've thought very carefully about that, and we believe that the other neighborhood associations should do as Goose Hollow does and think about representing, really working hard. You can't always have an exact ratio that looks like your last census numbers, but working hard to represent the demographics that you're voting on behalf of. And they seemed very open to that, and even talked about sending out from the office to all of the 90-something neighborhood associations in Portland, if the office sent them their stats on their demographics, so that people could be reminded of who they're supposed to be representing.
I mean, you know, we've talked about this before, that the way to deal with a system that's not properly representing everybody that should be represented and included is to work harder on that, not to marginalize that whole system, which I'm afraid is what's happening. Any other comments? We'll get, I just want to warn everybody that we're going to get into this in much more detail as we talk about the draft letter, but go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, who was the other person besides Suk, or are there people besides?
Diane, what's her
I
last
don't
name?
remember her last name.
Right. Yeah.
Okay,
Diane, what?
Right.
okay, yeah, I know who she is, I just didn't.
I have it in my meeting notes.
R-I-L-E-Y.
Make that part of our
Yep.
record, Diane Riley. They're both very bright, very capable people. We had a great discussion on a whole range of subjects. I don't want to, underplay the fact that we had a lot of common ground and we had a basis to continue the conversation. I just think there's some fundamental principles of how neighborhood associations are working as a system in the city that we've talked about before and we'll talk about more is, I think, fundamentally out of whack, and I think the system needs rejuvenation. And we've been frank in our views about that, as I said. Frank and constructive views were shared. Yes, Daniel.
Yeah, I just want to thank you what you've thanked for advocating for us, and what everything you're saying was spot on. I just want to add too that what also seems to be missing in the city's approach is that we also live in a very we may not be as multicultural as some would want, but we are very class diverse, and you have people from very different social classes living very close to each other. So a lot of it they don't account for is you can't divide every neighborhood up into a rich neighborhood or a poor neighborhood. In my situation and a number of other people, there are people in Section 8 housing that live in Goose Hollow because of disability, because of other reasons. So you can't just say that low-income people are all living in the slum part of the cities. So there's a lot of these neighbors, and a lot of times people that are really trying to live the American dream and better their lives and stuff are getting underrepresented in those discussions. They're not getting represented by the rich people, and we're not getting represented by the people that purport to be advocating for underrepresented groups. So, and the city just doesn't seem not the city, but the current regime in the city seems not to be able to get that issue, and is sort of undermining people's chance at economic mobility and social mobility.
Right, these are deep structural issues when you talk about gentrification and segregation and so on, and we've got to tackle them in a very rigorous, effective way, and it's not just about, bringing people to the table and pretending to listen to them or actually listening to them. I mean, yes, that's a step down the road, but there's a lot more to be done, obviously. Any other comments?
I just have one small comment, is that, if all else fails, what about legal recourse? Have we consulted somebody who could legally help us in this quest? If being reasonable and talking fails, what's the next step?
Well, at this point, we're are you talking about the rebranding specifically?
Yes,
We'll
exactly.
talk about that in more detail. Our conversation was broader than the rebranding. It was really about where is ONI or whatever the new name is, where is the agency going now? And what is the relationship of the neighborhood association system relative to the business association, the marijuana, the other, what do they call it, the island of misfit toys, I think is the phrase that was used. There are questions about, and we'll again get into this in a little more detail, about what the auditor found and what steps have been taken to address those concerns and what steps still need to be taken. So I think we'll talk about all those things. Obviously, Roger has been working on the ONI back and other levels of the process and can share that with us later. But
Just bring it up in our discussion and we'll deal with it.
Yeah, we'll get to that. In fact, that is the next item. Roger, do you want to bring up the letter? Is there any other comments on the discussion with Superi before we move into the...
Tiki torches are on sale at Fred Meyer.
Could we get a translation of that?
And pitchforks at the hardware store.
Okay, Roger.
The draft letter.
Oh, so Roger has a draft that went out yesterday, and my apologies if some of you could not open it. And the open document is supposed to be open document, so you should have been able to open it. But at any rate, we sent out a PDF version of it as well. And this is the third letter following the previous two that were unanimously approved. And this is more specifically addressing the rebranding. Roger, you want to?
Yeah, I will make a motion first to put this before us, and then once that's done and seconded, I will open the discussion, and then we'll go forward. And in our usual manner with discussion, we'll, deal with the letter, for instance, by friendly amendments or by formally proposed amendments, and then take whatever action the board decides, okay?
Right.
So I'm going to, right now, move the acceptance of the draft letter, see the exhibit on ONI, and direction for the president to send same.
Second? Eric seconds? Did you get that?
I got it here.
Okay.
Roger.
No, but did you get that, Eric seconds?
No. I got it now.
Okay. Okay, I'll try to be brief in my introduction of this letter. I'll just make a few points and let the discussion begin, speak to the concerns and questions, etc. I want to say, this is my personal opinion, this has been a top-down coup, not a coup engineered by a military junta in a banana republic, but one engineered by an unresponsive bureaucracy in a supposedly progressive Portland. Happily, we at Goose Hollow are not alone in our experience, our perceptions, and our concerns. In fact, I want to open the discussion by retailing actions and opinions of the Northwest District Association, NWDA, our neighbor association. They are, like us, one of the original neighborhood associations, renowned, or maybe in ONI's and the city's view, infamous, for their past neighborhood activism. They stopped, with others, the wholesale expansion of Legacy Good Samaritan. The Alphabet District could not be what it is without their activism. Now, at the NWDA board meeting on Monday, they unanimously requested of ONI and City Council, 1, identification and clarification of the factors that precipitated the renaming, rebranding exercise. What is the problem that this effort is intending to solve? 2, and once this is done, that the neighborhood associations and citizenry are allowed to formally offer comments on the proposal in hearings that comply with the public review requirements for a legislative process. Now, some of the points that came up at NWDA that are relevant here. ONA, the original name of ONI, the Office of Neighborhood Associations, became ONI, the Office of Neighborhood Involvement, in the 90s. Unlike earlier name changes, this name change would appear to involve changes that would require revisions to city code and its mission. A fundamental shift in purpose is to give, quote, identity groups, unquote, equal standing with the neighborhood associations. Concerns NWDA has with such a proposal are both procedural, and there are issues that relate to the change in purpose of the agency. They, for instance, quote, as I do in my letter, City Code 396060F, and I will, if I can find it in the letter, I'll read it to you. Let's see. ONI shall support and promote public involvement within the neighborhood association framework. Current proposals, and again this is from NWDA, are to facilitate public involvement through organizations outside the neighborhood association framework. The geographic basis of neighborhood associations, particularly when dealing with land use issues, is an essential balance to the at-large composition of the council. This is a great point, and you heard Michael make it in his discussion with Sukri. And then, identity groups are inherently exclusive when ironically, the complaint against neighborhood associations seems to have been about their alleged exclusion of underrepresented groups. Although there are social justice issues in Portland that need to be addressed, it is questionable that this is an effective way of doing so, and might there be unintended consequences. So I'll just stop there, and we'll go on to consider the letter and to have our discussion.
I'd like to say that I really respect my colleagues over at Northwest District Association. Steve Pinger has led the charge on a lot of this and has carefully thought through a lot of these issues. They're really respected and good people. They've worked so hard on behalf of their neighborhood association as we have. And I really feel good about this, considering that they just unanimously adopted almost exactly the same letter.
So,
Yeah, Liz.
I'm late to the party here, but when I just read this letter, there are parts of it that it's more like we're fighting with somebody than that we want them to change. It's talking about which documented gross incompetence and dereliction of duty within the Office of Neighborhood Involvement. It's like asking for a fight. There's problems. I don't doubt that there were problems documented, but to characterize them as gross incompetence and dereliction of duty seems to me to ask whoever receives this letter to just tune it out. So my question is, are we just trying to pick a fight, or are we trying to actually get them to change their position?
I'll just comment on that, not having drafted the letter, but having observed this dynamic for a while now, and it seems to me there's a number of different audiences. You know, we've had our very polite civil discussion with Suk and Diane, making these same views known essentially. But we also, I think, have some of the, you know, the political activism and the militancy, if you will, that might be the only way forward. You know, the old saying, if they don't see the light, they need to feel the heat. And there may be a certain amount of that involved here. This is a very tough letter, there's no question about that. But I'm wondering if that isn't what is going to be necessary, at least to get, and frankly, the audit was tough. The city auditor's audit was quite tough, and the response to that has really been surprising to me, that it hasn't been, well, let's look inward and see where we need to reform what we're doing. It's been more about, let's change the packaging.
I think the audit was, what, 2 years, maybe 3 years
It was in
ago?
November.
2 years in November.
And it was scathing. The auditor basically said these things. And we ran this version, or Roger ran this version by our colleagues at Northwest District Association, and they said it looks great, and they added suggested points. Are you going to deal with any of the things they suggested, Roger? Or?
Well, I just want to say, as far as this goes, I agree with what Tracy says. You know, the audit was scathing, but I'm open to friendly amendments. You know, I made this draft. This draft is from me with input from other people and out of conversations with a lot of people who are involved in this. But, you know, if there are particular things, points you want to change, language you want to change, etc., bring them out and we'll discuss them. I'm open to this. I'm not saying that what I wrote is what we should send without any change whatsoever. Not at all.
In fact, Roger, I did make some suggestions to you when you were doing the draft to change a little bit, and you picked up on that. The unsupported by evidence, I think, before that said,
we won't say it.
Yeah,
Can I
Cal.
go ahead? Okay, so I have a couple of questions, and I see, I understand Liz's concern, and I have a similar concern, but I'm very supportive of what the letter is saying and trying to accomplish. So my first question is, in the first paragraph where it says, which documented gross incompetence and dereliction of duty, was that quoted out of the report by the auditor? Is that a quote from the report?
No, that's a quote from the minority report on the budget, which was submitted by Eric and myself. So it's a characterization of the audit findings. If you want to smooth it down in some way, that's fine. But that was my view of what the audit revealed.
Okay. So, well, okay, I didn't really know by reading this. I thought maybe it came from that report. But yeah, I think that should be smoothed down. I really do. I think that's just coming across too much in your face. And some of these Liz may already have circled on her copy, I guess. This. So I don't know. And then the comment about the optics. So at the top of the second page, where it says have city governments or government and its agencies learned nothing from then candidate Mayor Wheeler's allusion. I kind of like that, but I don't like it either. So I have a little bit, I'm fighting with that sentence the way it's worded, in terms of, you know, there must be a smoother way of saying it, I think, without ruffling too many people's feathers. At the end of that paragraph, this is outright stupidity and waste. I think that's just too strong. I mean, that's just, I mean, it could be dropped. What's the point of getting somebody's feathers ruffled? They'll just ignore the letter. Foster's, then in the 2 paragraphs later, near the bottom, fairly long paragraph in the middle of the page too. It says fosters concentration of power in coteries, engenders apathy. That seemed a little strong too to me. Misled the association. I don't know, some more ordinary wording, less inflaming. So that's just another one. I'm just mentioning the ones that trouble me. And then right at the bottom, point 2, consider restructuring this troubled agency. Well, there's got to be another way of putting that. Okay, I circled laterally. It's just simply, I thought it was, and bloated edifice. So there are some, some wording, I'm not sure what to call it, I just find too strong. Okay.
So I guess Jerry has suggested that we do this thing, turn our name tags up so that we know that we.
Thank you. I'm pretty familiar with 3.96. I wrote a lot of it along with Moshe Lenski and 3 other people that were the most active people on the so-called Great Committee. And part of that piece of legislation was in direct response to the fact that many neighborhoods were doing a good job, and a whole bunch more were totally ignoring their responsibilities as representatives of their particular geography. Leading into that discussion, there had been several years of active organizations trying to figure out how to improve the sort of populist, democratic nature of this population. How do you deal with folks? One of the things we came up with was a better educational process for folks that would be involved in the democratic process. Another thing that we discussed was a system of incentives to get neighborhoods to actually get out on the street and talk to people. One of the things that we also discussed was that identity groups were antithetic to the democratic process, largely because they're, 1, not open, and 2, pursue an agenda that is not necessarily in the interest of the public at large, but are in their own interest. So we get not only identity groups, but we get interest groups that might as well be registered lobbyists. It seems that ONI has missed the point, and has basically taken the pointers from the prior administration of ONI that had been, I hate to say this, pursuing an agenda for about 20 years to get interest groups on an equal footing with the neighborhood associations. Some of that was out of frustration with the neighborhood associations to not pull in members of those interest groups. And part of it was simply, let's just do this, let's get this done. There are people out there in those interest groups that would like to be part of the process. How do you get them into the process? That's the part that ONI is missing, is how do you integrate all of this? The current funding for neighborhood, for groups without boundaries,
non-geographic entities.
Yeah, non-geographic, okay, good, or non-place-based groups, has been in place for 12, 15 years. When You and I were both on that 8 years? Okay. We were both on the BAC that did that. It started out as an effort to bring those folks into the neighborhood orbit. That didn't work. I'm postulating here. It didn't work because there was resistance on both sides. And it wasn't mediated or addressed sufficiently, at any rate, by the administration. We need to double down on pressure to get that addressed. Not necessarily to blow up the administration, nor in fact to set a torch to the whole program. Thank you.
Yeah, Eric, you had a comment?
Well, I just wanted to say, and it kind of goes into the last Neighbors West Northwest meeting and directors and chairs, which I've been recently at. There are other neighborhood associations, particularly I think the Pearl District and I think it was Hills, that also have a lot of questions. Whereas before it seemed that at NWNW, Goose Hollow was the outlier. Now it seems like there's a lot more support in terms of needed changes within ONI and even the neighborhood associations. The only other question that I had, and I brought this to Roger's attention earlier, is on page 2, where it talks about the $25,000 of our tax dollars went without competitive bidding to a firm. And then, yes, it might be cronyism, but to my knowledge, if a contract goes to a minority-owned business or a woman minority-owned business, the threshold could be $25,000 with no bidding. So I don't know if it's necessary to put that in all the specifics.
Well, it may have still been bad judgment, right, whether it was legal or not.
I will call it cronyism no matter what. That was someone who worked on her campaign. That's a reward, you know. But we don't have to put that in. I want to say to everybody who's saying something here that I will accept changes in the wording. Let's make specific suggestions, paragraph by paragraph, on what you want change, and I will either accept it as a friendly amendment or I will say no and we'll have a vote. And I do want to respond to one thing, namely to Cal, which was when you objected to in the middle, the third paragraph on page 2, where we quote, strikes at the heart of participatory democracy, fosters concentration of power and coteries, engenders apathy in ordinary citizens, and devastates neighborhood involvement. That is something that we put in our letter in March that went to City Council that we approved.
We're just quoting ourselves.
We're quoting ourselves there we're quoting our last letter, and I, you know, I have to say, as far as that paragraph goes, we're talking about years of ONI and the coalitions who are ONI's creatures disenfranchising Portland citizens, not allowing them to vote on matters with their own neighborhood associations. This is one of those matters that I, as a Democrat with a lowercase d, will go to the wall about. You know, that is just not something that should ever happen in a city that thinks it's progressive.
Can I suggest something that, for the patience of our audience, that we maybe table this to the end and then everybody can think of what friendly amendments they'd like to suggest, and anybody who's wonky and wants to listen to all of the wonky details can stay for every excruciating second, but we can just keep on going with the agenda to move this along.
That would be fine with me, just so long as we act on this by today, because this is supposed to take effect the 1st of July.
So I'm tabling it to the end of the meeting. Does that require any motion?
That requires a motion and a vote.
Motion.
Excuse me, Tracy made the motion.
And there's discussion.
I just, all I wanted to do is, and I not to put Mark on the spot, but Mark has a lot of, you know, you've been in a lot of these meetings, and I was wanting to know your opinion. If you could state your opinion about the letter.
Let's wait till the discussion at the end of the
Okay,
meeting.
that's fine.
Discussing the
Yeah,
ta-
we're
the
gonna,
table.
we're going to do the, if this vote passes, we'll put this all at the end of the meeting. I think we can probably agree to that, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Is it, okay,
Yeah,
all in
exactly.
favor
That's
of the
everyone.
motion? Okay, okay.
Okay.
Well, you know that Andy,
No,
I've
hello.
seen him in like about an hour, so he must have left pretty early.
You have to leave early.
I love it, full board.
Yeah.
Okay, so, yeah, that's right, we're short.
At 10.
So Tracy, you wanted to bring up the Kings Hill rezoning?
Yes, so I'm going to read a section from Architectural Heritage Center's letter that is also very similar to the Northwest District Association letter, which was also presented to our Planning Committee meeting. So there is something called Better Housing by Design, and they're trying to slip in a massive upzoning of Kings Hill and the Alphabet District and other historic districts. Just to explain the details, I'm going to just read directly from here. This is the Architectural Heritage Center's objection that they sent to the Planning and Sustainability Commission. We are very concerned about the proposed rezoning within two historic district areas in the Alphabet and Kings Hill historic districts that are currently zoned RH and are proposed to be rezoned to RM rather than RM3. These are new zoning definitions. We will no longer have RH. The RM3 zone is characterized as medium to high density with mid-rise buildings up to 6 stories tall. In contrast, the RM4 zone is described as high density and intensely urban zone with buildings located close to sidewalks, a mid-rise to high-rise zone with buildings of up to 7 or more stories. Moreover, in the RM4 zone, a deeper housing affordability bonus can increase the FAR to a maximum of 7-to-1, which is almost double the density from the current RH zone base maximum of 4-to-1. 8 stories tall with a height of 80 feet, or the maximum is 100 feet in RM4. Buildings would be surely out of place on the residential streets in either of these historic districts. So I'm making a motion that we give our board president the ability to write a letter that mimics the Architectural Heritage Center letter, the letter that came before the Planning Commission and the Northwest District Association, that simply objects to changing Kings Hill and the Alphabet District to RM4 and to request that they change it to RM3. That's my motion.
And that is consistent, I believe, with our previous stated positions on the 2035 plan and
Yes.
other upzoning that was proposed.
We've had several attempts to sneak in upzoning, and we've objected to all of it, both in Kings Hill and Alphabet. And so,
Tracy, can you give me the wording of the motion?
to allow our president to write a letter that mimics the language in the Architectural Heritage Center letter, objecting to the rezoning of Kings Hill to RM4 and asking for a rezoning to RM3.
RM3.
Objecting to 4, requesting 3, RM3.
To 4, zoning 4? RM4, yeah.
Objecting to RM4 and requesting RM3 zoning.
Okay, and you'll give me a copy of that letter?
I will send the entire board a copy of the Architectural Heritage Center letter, but it's already been presented at the Planning Committee, and I need somebody to second me.
I'll second. Oh, Sherry, go ahead.
I'll second.
Discussion?
Oh, I just, thank you for being on top of this. I mean, when I got your email, it just blew me away. I can't believe that we're at this same thing again. It's just,
It's over and over and over again.
it's relentless.
We're having to be so intensely activist on these issues. I have to say that about 6 months ago, I stopped reading 2,000 pages of code every 3 months just to preserve my mental sanity, and this slid right by me because I wasn't reading that code. So I'm very grateful to the activists in Northwest District Association who brought this to our attention.
Well, we have to be careful here also that there are two theories of what the city should become. One of them is the closest you could call it is the Vancouver model. You know, let's upzone, let's build, let's get more units. That will meet demand and that will lower price. And that didn't exactly work in Vancouver, as we know. And then the other side of the coin of that is to say anybody who opposes that is an NIMBY. They are, you know, planning for the old days, right? So on and so forth. All of the things that we hear alleged. And I think it's up to us to clearly articulate an alternative theory of how we can densify, how we can accommodate people as we are already doing, and how we can preserve, for example, our existing affordable housing, which is in the building that Roger and I live in. It's about a half of what the cheapest new rental unit will be. So the idea that these buildings are under threat and we're going to build new buildings in order to be more affordable is not supported by the evidence. So anyway, I think that's the bigger picture that we have to make sure we continue to counter that narrative and not just fall into the trap, because it is a trap to say, you guys are just NIMBYs, you know, here you go again. You know, you're just trying to keep your own views and your own, you know, ways of doing it. No, we have an alternative theory of what a great city can be, and it's an informed theory. It's not, it's informed by evidence. You know.
And we've made public statements and several letters that, you know, I live in a 100-year-old house. I support zoning that allows my house to be subdivided into smaller units to create more density within 100-year-old houses and add 2 historically appropriate ADUs in the backyard. I do not support demolishing a 100-year-old house that has historic value. So,
Mark, you had a comment?
Well, just a question, is there we have a deadline for this letter?
so this has we've already missed the deadline. It was open until Monday, that's why I sent out this information to the board, but it doesn't.
I think they extended it to
They extended
June 25th.
Okay, so we have time, but not that much time.
Okay.
And then we also need to have a position on this as it moves forward, because it's very unlikely that the Planning and Sustainability Commission will act differently than they have been acting all along. So we will probably be fighting it at City Council, in which case we need a vote from this board in order to act on that.
So we can get it in on, Michael can get it in on the deadline then?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And then the deadline's passed for that survey that we filled out, right? That related to this very thing?
Oh, yes, I believe so.
Okay.
Okay. Any further discussion? Call the motion. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, unanimous. Oh, did you?
Roger abstained?
No, I voted, yes.
Oh, I didn't see your hand.
Okay. Okay.
Steve's got a question.
Yeah.
All right. I made a comment on that plan. I think there's a flaw in the economics of the 2035 plan, and also this, it's a supply side model. If you build it, they'll come. How do we know they'll come? I haven't seen any kind of projection that all of these people are going to show up. And if you increase the densification in the Alphabet District in Kings Hill, people say, ooh, this is ugly, I'm not going to come. So they're going to build all of these buildings and nobody's going to show up, and the people are going to go bankrupt, the developers, and ruin a good city.
The thing is that Northwest Portland, Goose Hollow, and downtown are the 3 densest areas in all of Oregon. We are already incredibly densely populated neighborhoods, all of Oregon. So we have strong density in Goose Hollow, and we're not against density. We already have it.
But
The point is, we'd like to save our historic district. So.
Yeah, I understand that.
No, I know that
Where are all of these people coming from, and why are they coming?
I think your point is well taken, Steve. I think they may come, but part of the problem, what you allude to, is that real estate markets are dynamic. They're not fixed. It's a little like widening a freeway, you know. Suddenly you widen the freeway and you think there's no more congestion, then everybody else gets on the road, right? And so what might happen is what happened in Vancouver, is that you got more people coming to the city because now you got all these great big buildings and they become even more excited, pay even more money to live there, and the price goes up. That's the other extreme of.
You mean Vancouver, British Columbia?
Yeah, Vancouver.
They came from Hong Kong when the communist China overtook it.
But we're also seeing people coming.
So are we going to base this on geopolitical considerations?
What I'm saying is that it can happen either way. And it's not a simple mechanical system where you just say, well, we know there's going to be this fixed number of people coming, and we know we have to build this fixed number of housing. It doesn't work like that. You build the housing, and then they either don't come, which is the scenario you're talking about, or even more come, which is the scenario I'm talking about. The point is that it's a dynamic system, and you can't predict ahead of time. What you can do is keep what you have, make sure that it's still working as well as you can, and gradually, carefully provide for the people that you know you already have. So I think it goes both ways. Real estate is not a mechanical system. It's an elastic, dynamic system, and I think we're not being careful enough about that in the 2035 and the other plans that we have. So I'm agreeing with your point that it's not a simple, predictable system. I don't know that you're right that the people won't come. It could even be that more people come, not less. So we don't know.
We had a scenario like that in Rockville, where initially we moved out to Rockville, and there were 2 lanes going for 270. It started out 2 lanes on either side. By the time we left Rockville,
There are 6 lines.
It went to like 10 lanes in each direction or something incredible. And the Montrose Parkway used to be Montrose Road that was 1 way in each direction. It is now a parkway. And the noise and the pollution and the lack of parking, and it just became unbearable. And that's what my fear is.
So that's called induced demand. You know, if you keep expanding supply, you may create even more demand if you're not careful. Or as you say, you might end up with just empty, undesirable places.
Move the agenda, please.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you for your hearing.
I would just like to say, in terms of people moving to Portland, over the last few years, Portland has been in the top 5 or 7 cities as destinations. This year, they're predicting we might not even be in the top 25. So whether the bloom is off the rose or not remains to be seen.
Well, the prices are certainly slowing down with the in-migration. There's no doubt about that. Okay, shall we, Daniel, quickly.
Yeah, 2 quick points. One of the points I mentioned in the letter, and that is market rate housing that does not take Section 8 is not affordable housing. So I'm very concerned about all the greenwashing involved with disclaiming, because every time I've talked to developers, they don't take. I've asked about Section 8 as a litmus test, and when they say I'm affordable and it's not. And those houses right against the Washington Park apartment buildings, I can't see them taking Section 8, or I can see that that's more market rate, and it would be very hard for Section 8 people to get in. So this is really it's really becoming like a disinformation campaign. I don't want to say it that strongly, but it's the truth. And I'm very disturbed by it, and I find that approach very offensive, to be honest. And the other thing I would, no, I'll just stick with that for right now. Oh, no, I had another alternative. Since Portland has been a flagship of how other cities should be, one solution that I can offer is that Portland should be a model for how cities around the country could be used. Instead of everyone coming here to Portland, having people develop a lot of the Portland ideas for their own local communities, adapt it.
That's a great point. So this is a much bigger conversation that we should carry on in the future. Obviously, the whole affordable housing challenge and the inclusionary zoning, which is not working well, and what methods is the city going to use, what's working, what's not working. I mean, huge issues, and we're certainly not getting it right. It's fair enough to make that point. And I think what you said, Daniel, is really important. It's not just about cramming everybody into Portland. Also, 3/4 or 80% of the people in this region don't live in the core of Portland. They live in the suburban areas that really need to be more walkable and mixed use and transit oriented and compact and all the things that we already have. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Let's not, spend all of our energies on the core. Let's spend the proper amount of attention on the 85% of the region that's outside of the core. Okay, that's probably enough for.
Jerry had something, did you?
I just wanted
Jerry?
Michael to move the agenda, please.
I second that.
Yeah.
Boy, that's, Jerry's telling you to move along, Michael, that's telling right there. Jerry's telling you you're slow, you're
all right.
slow.
Call the motion.
We already did it.
voted on it.
We already voted on it.
That's
We already voted.
Part done. Okay.
We're ready for the next thing.
All right, appointment of election committee. Roger, you mentioned this, that we need to do that, right?
We don't need to do it until next month, but we have to do it by next month, and I just thought that it seemed to be a light agenda, we could get this done. Basically, every year we have to appoint an election committee of 3. And those 3 people should not be people who are going to be running for the board. That applies in our instance here with the people present to 5 people, namely Eric, Cal, Michael, Jerry, and Liz. So we need to, at some point, form a committee and with a chair for those 3 people. And it's not a hard thing. You probably only meet twice, because all you do is put an ad in the Northwest Examiner using the ad we've used the last 2 years with some changes made, announcing the election. And then you verify with everybody who self-nominates themselves whether they're a member or not. And then when that's done, you count the ballots at the November meeting. 3 people count the ballots, and it's observed by a representative of the 4th estate, etc. That's all. So maybe we should ask for a volunteer to chair, and then maybe people will volunteer among the 5 to serve on the committee. And I will be happy to meet with them initially, because I basically put forward, I facilitated the election committee procedures that are in the bylaws, okay?
I'm going to have to put myself out of that since I might not be living in the neighborhood. I could put myself forward, but I might not be on this board in November, so.
Okay. So are you asking now for a volunteer to chair?
If one will come forward, as I say, we can actually do this next month, but next month is absolutely the latest at which we can do it, because they have to meet. We don't meet in August, and by the beginning of September, the committee has to meet and act on an ad, et cetera, et cetera.
We're missing one potential volunteer. Isn't Andy a potential volunteer? Andy is Andy is not here.
But Andy is not eligible. He terms out in November. Yes.
Okay. So who else did you say other than, I'm glad to be on the.
Cal, you,
Yeah.
Jerry, Liz.
Okay, would Jerry or Liz be willing to chair?
Well, I thought we were the people who were disqualified. Are we qualified? You're qualified.
No, you are qualified because you don't have to
Okay,
stand
I'm
for
willing,
election.
I'm willing to chair.
Good for you.
Okay.
Okay.
So we just need one more.
And then Jerry, are you willing to serve also?
I'll serve, but I'm going to be off racing in October, so.
Okay.
That should not matter because you will meet in September to put the ad out, and if, as long as you're here to count the votes in November, it's okay.
Okay. All right, so appointed. Then thank you, Liz. And thank you, Jerry.
We don't need a vote on that.
No.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. We have to approve that.
Right. Okay, then I'm not going to make the motion if somebody.
Well, you have appointed them, and so you asked for approval.
Right. Okay, so all in favor of approving those board appointments, please raise your hand. Liz, you? Okay.
I approve myself.
Unanimous.
You have to do that.
Okay, so 10-0. All right, approval of minutes. Cal.
Okay, everybody who wants a copy of the minutes, need the minutes? Need a copy?
I will abstain. I wasn't here.
Let me see, here's the copy.
I will abstain also, although I will note that the video is up on the website. And if anyone would like to.
Anybody else on the board need a copy? Do you guys have a copy?
Yeah.
Copy? Anybody want a copy out there? There's some copies here. 4 of them. Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to move that it be approved, subject to whatever corrections may be raised by the members.
Second.
Second, Tracy, seconds. Comments?
Mark?
Mark?
You don't have to write none of this down, Cal, I'm gonna hand this to you in about a minute.
Okay.
Underneath the list of names there, the absent should be 4 instead of 3.
The list of names.
You don't have to write none of this down.
No,
Cal.
but
I'm gonna
I
hand
want
this
to
you.
see it.
Well, I gotta read it before I hand it to you, because I haven't got it memorized, okay? Where Al's name is spelled wrong, his first name.
How many times have I done that?
I don't know. In attachment number 3, I think you want to put Goose Hollow Day, add days status report.
Okay.
In number 2, the motion, at the end of the first line, I think you should change this to its.
Okay.
On number 4, towards the end of the second paragraph, you have transportation and parking, those 2 words mixed up, and the same with the next line down.
The order you mean?
Yeah, the order.
Okay.
Safety, parking, transportation.
Okay. And then, under the 9, the communications report, I think you just, I have it crossed out here where it says this year and this year, you got it listed twice, but I think you can leave both of them.
Okay.
And then, under 11, it says, a vote approval not needed, so just add an L to that.
Which number was that?
Number 11. You said a vote approved not needed, I think you mean a vote approval not needed.
Okay, I can check.
Okay.
First one is the only one that I want to see. Absent,
Should be, has to add up to 11.
well, I guess Liz was, at the beginning of the meeting, it was correct. But then Liz got appointed. Okay, so I'll put 11. 7 and 4, right?
Yeah, it's all.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
Real quick one to the treasurer. So is the 779.51 in unit, in number 9, is that the amount that's now been covered by NWNW?
Wait a minute, I have no idea.
So somebody said, was it Mark, that we got additional funds? So is that now covered?
Well, as I say, that doesn't go through.
No,
the
that's,
treasurer.
that's a grant from the
Yeah.
community
So was
to,
the grant increased to this number, is that what you're saying?
I guess it was because they paid for the full amount of the printer.
they paid,
It was supposed to be $750, I believe.
they paid, which I didn't find out until about 2 hours ago, that they paid Scott that full amount.
Okay, so I just want to know.
Scott was only authorized to spend $750, but
Okay,
you know Scott, you expense.
so I'm done, I accept all.
I think it was the cost of the extension cord to get it 15 feet away.
So I accept all those fixes. Thank you. Didn't ask for a vote for mine.
There were Twinkies at the checkout aisle, I couldn't help myself.
Impulse buy, we know.
It is called Goose Hollow Days, not Day.
Goose Hollow Days, yes.
The,
He said that.
in,
I think I copied it from the agenda, that was incorrect.
But the whole word, either whether it's day or days, the
It is
whole word was
correct.
left out.
Yeah, oh.
it is correct, as written.
All right,
And
I'll
Stadium
get-
Oversight
I'll pick
Committee,
all those things up.
number 11, is just the verb was missing.
Thank you.
The vote to approve.
I got all of them, Mark. Oh, you got that one, right? You got all.
I think Jeremy's giving you more corrections.
Oh, you got more?
No,
think
I'm
so.
correcting you.
No,
No, but more than what Mark did.
It's
Okay.
not, okay, never mind.
So Mark,
Jerry
Mark
said
them
it's
and give them
to
to me.
approve.
He got it, yeah.
Just mark them and give them to me. I'll fix it. Okay? Then you mark it and give it to me. Then we'll save everybody time.
Just add 2.
All
All the
right,
questions.
yeah. All right, so let's have a vote. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Wait, wait,
Okay,
wait.
I'm abstaining and Rob is abstaining.
All right.
Because we were not here.
So that is, 8,
That's
10 minus
4
2.
and 2.
8,
Does
10.
this go, are we supposed to represent this?
Last year. And,
Yeah, we're running out of time to deal with it.
thank you.
Okay, treasurer's report.
I feel like Al Pacino in Godfather 3. Every time I get ready to get out, they keep pulling me back in. But anyway, for this month, we have $3,221.62 in the checking account, $250.15 in the savings, for a total of $3,471.77. Of that, we got $1,200 in donation for Goose Hollow Days. And this does not, at this point, really pertain to the Treasury, although I am going to be keeping track. We have a grant for $2,000 from NWNW, and they paid Peter Cavalis the down payment for the stage. We have approximately $1,600 left in that. And that's it.
Okay.
Move to accept.
Have a second?
Second.
Sherry seconds?
Question,
Yes. Any comment?
question.
Question? Okay, all in favor?
I have a question still, okay? Because Eric brought it up, and I asked him to bring it up, he didn't bring it up.
Oh, you mean in terms of how you want to quantify it?
Yeah, do we want to record the Goose Holidays fund in here? And so that's one question. And should it be the total money, or should it be the balance each month?
Well, I can only tell you what we did last year. It was pretty much just what was in checking and saving. And once we got in all the donations, at that point, I would then periodically say what we were spending money on. And then when everything is all said and done, At the end of Goose Holidays, you get a full accounting, which I also then have to send to NWNW. I think at this point, because we're just shelling out deposits, and there'll probably be some more coming, and we really haven't gotten in that many direct donations yet. At this point, I just look at it, it's really the balances that are due, and then once we have some major outlays, which will be happening, at that point, we can, get in a little bit more into the weeds.
Well, I can drop it, but it's just that we've had that placeholder for over a year. And we could just drop it from here if the chair and the treasurer do the bookkeeping between them. Maybe somebody reports where we are.
I think the treasurer ultimately needs to keep track of this, right?
I'm keeping track of everything
Yeah.
until I abscond.
Okay, so that's.
So you don't want to discuss it at the meeting here, right? Is that what you're saying?
No, we don't need to.
No, if anybody has a specific question, I'll have, most of that information with me.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, and then the next item actually is Goose Holidays. I think we've already covered it. Melanie, you have anything to add?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Oh, actually, I forgot, I did leave out one thing, there's a poster contest that's being held. So on July 9th is a deadline for all 7 of the artists who entered to submit their electronic files to me, and I'll give to Scott, he's going to post them onto our webpage. And then all of us, and the public, if you're interested, has to take a look, and we're going to vote like within a few days, because we need to pick one and then move on it to do the posters and everything else, not the materials. So look for that.
How soon are we going to be having to vote?
You're gonna vote that week, so July 9th is the deadline for them to submit, the artist will submit the work to me, I'll send it to Scott, he's gonna post it onto the website, and then I'll let you guys all know that they're all there, to take a look at it, and then submit your votes by email. I'll be out of town, so I'll have to do it electronically too. And then that week, so within, by the end of that week, so by Friday at the latest, I'm hoping sooner, because we really need to get on the promotional materials.
I have a question. Who votes on this? Is this,
All of us.
I mean, just the board, or is it
Well, we're
open
not
to
gonna
the
limit it to the
citizen?
board, anyone interested in voting can vote, but the committee, may have ultimate decision-making power.
It's kind of like America's Got Talent. You can
Sorry?
vote up. It's like America's Got Talent. You can vote up
Yeah,
to 10
it's
times.
Or where are we gonna vote on?
Well, is this in case, this in case the Russians attack our website?
Okay, communications.
Okay, for Communications Committee, I think we were sent an email that this next year's worth of money for communications is getting started. We don't have to have anything in today, but I would like everyone to think about what they would like to spend their communications funds on. We can get $750 by just asking for it, but anything over that, we have to have the NWNW board vote. So that's what I have to report on. My co-chair may have something about the new fancy email we got today.
Sure, okay, let me summarize. We used vertical response first, and it was not very well received. It's kind of difficult to use. The templates that we had didn't really look very good. And also, it's very difficult to separate people into different groups. So they're getting emails from the board, they're getting emails from planning, they're getting emails from bylaws committee, and things like that. And if they unsubscribe from any one of those emails, they're off all of those lists. We can't parse it out under vertical response. So we wanted to move to a new system that had a better graphic user interface and was more user-friendly. And so we used, we moved to MailChimp. And the email that I sent out yesterday was actually the first email to the whole group that we sent out. So I've created 2 templates right now, one for the board email, one for planning. And I want to kind of leave it up to you. What other kind of groups of emails do you think are going to be going out there? Because each would be a separate group, and if they, for instance, are not interested in planning, but they like bylaws, then they can unsubscribe to planning, but still be on our list and get the board emails and get the bylaws.
But shouldn't everyone in the neighborhood association get planning notifications?
Well, I mean, it's their choice. I mean, so it's just like when you subscribe or unsubscribe, you can choose your preferences. So you can click on it, and then for Scott Schaefer, I can go ahead and click on the type of emails that I want. And so that I don't feel that I'm overwhelmed with emails that I don't wish to read, and just unsubscribe to the entire list.
So it's all opt-in, it's not opt-out. You're
Right.
automatically, you're not automatically
Right.
subscribed to anything unless you specifically.
Right, and so if you have any ideas, again, I have templates for planning, I have templates for the board emails when we send out agenda items or kind of general interest items. Any other templates do you think I would need to create for different people?
Okay.
Anybody else?
Well, unless you do one for public safety, parking, and transportation.
Yeah, I absolutely can do that, for sure.
And I know they'll be meeting, I think, every other month.
Okay.
But
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Michael, we discuss this all, we each got this packet.
Yeah, when we come back on the meeting, on the letter, we'll talk about that. Okay, actually, the next item is public safety, parking, and transportation, and since Carl is not here, I think we'll move forward unless anybody has any.
They did not meet.
Sorry?
They did not meet that last month anyway. Yeah, they meet next month. And the time is wrong on the calendar on the Northwest Examiner. It says 6:30 instead of 7. But that's not surprising, since for the last 3 months, my bylaws meeting has been noted as 7:70 p.m.
But this committee is now going to meet every quarter. Or every other month?
Every other
Quarterly.
month.
Was it
Quarterly.
Okay. Was it quarterly? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it says right here.
Okay. So
Well, that's what I was told. Okay, well, that's a rumor. Jerry, Stadium Oversight Committee.
Stadium Oversight Committee has been meeting, albeit not frequently. Right now, the major emphasis is on getting the Timbers website to reflect accurately where parking is available. I think we haven't entirely abandoned the idea of demand management, but we're doing a certain amount of supply management at the moment. There are programs that different stadiums, different municipalities in cooperation with stadiums across the country have used that identify where you can park, generally at municipally owned parking structures or at parking structures that are convenient to mass transit, not necessarily in the vicinity of the stadium itself. This has obvious benefits to the neighborhoods. The Timbers are also exploring, along with the NWDA parking and transportation folks. There's a name for that committee. It's a sort of a term of art. Using the legacy Good Sam parking facilities. Since parking isn't necessarily part of the hospital's core business, they're a little bit slow to the game, but they have all of the hardware installed to allow them to measure cars in, cars out of those parking structures, so they can actually tell you how many parking spaces are available. The MAC could do that, by the way. At several of the other parking structures in town, that information is available, but it's only available once you get to the parking structure. Nobody has up to this time put together a portal that gathers all that information from different parking structures and then presents it in a single place. Well, the possible exception that there are two parking structures that display their information across, as you approach downtown across the Morrison Bridge. You might take a look at that if you care to see how it might work. That same information can be put on a web page. So someone driving in from, let's say, Hillsborough, could look at it and say, oh, the parking structure at 10th and Morrison is full. Maybe I ought to go to the one that's 5 blocks down the street.
And so if they pull over first before they look at it.
Yes. Or look at it from home before they leave.
Well, let's see. It would probably appear on their GPS. I'm not sure that the hands-free, which is hands-free. I don't know. The Timbers tech staff is getting there, but they're not totally up to speed yet. We're working on it. Still working on a certain amount of demand management, trying to figure out how the timbers actually can impact transportation demand. That's it for stadium oversight.
Okay, thanks. Bylaws, Roger.
We did not meet last month. I was happily in the Appalachians. And we will meet next Wednesday, and the main topic that we will discuss, and will be at the Legends at 7 o'clock, will be the boundary description for the bylaws.
Great. And back to you, Jerry, planning and zoning, and Scott.
Okay, our June meeting, okay, if I just go ahead?
Go ahead, Jerry.
Our June meeting, we basically talked about two things. One was the Butler block, and the other one was having to do with rezoning, particularly in Kings Hill. And Tracy already gave that report, so I really don't need to say anything. I went to 2 DAR meetings today. One was having to do with the GoCo Art Tower. It's the half a block of the Artist Rep Theater. I have the package that was presented at the DAR. Generally, it's a 15-story building. The commission was appreciated the elegance of the building. It has a very interesting base and a very interesting top. And the area in the middle is pretty much institutional. I observed that that's kind of fine for a commercial structure. Elegance is probably celebrated in terms of commercial structures. Residential buildings are messy, and culturally, I'm not sure that they want to portray their building as a residential building as being that much of a departure from where the culture really is. Just a thought. But there are a number. That was one of them. They've got big problems with access to the 2 different kinds of activities on the site. As proposed, at least in this DAR, there were a total of 8 across the sidewalk access points. 2 on Morrison, which the Transportation Bureau is bound and determined to get rid of. That's the drop-off site. 3 on 15th. 2 of them are garage accesses, and 1 of them is to an alleyway. And 3 on 16th, which similarly 2 garage accesses and an alleyway. The charge to our architects is to figure out how to cut that down. And this was a design advisory review, DAR. that's a non-binding kind of discussion between the architects and the developers and the commission. Sometimes they let other folks, in this case a neighborhood person, comment or question, which we did. And yeah, I think that the project that comes forward to the next, if there's a second DAR, that would be fine. Or to a hearing, which would be the logical next step. It's going to be a different project. There's a lot to
While
like
we're young,
about the
Jerry.
project. Pardon me?
I said, while we're young.
Yeah, right. They seem to have an incentive to go ahead. One of the commission folks grabbed me by the collar in between hearings and said, hey, Goose Hollow is the hot spot right now. I said, how's that? He said, well, we've got more proposals in the pipeline having to do with development in Goose Hollow than any other single neighborhood in Portland right now. I thought that was interesting, not necessarily that it's entirely accurate, but then that it would be the perception on the part of a design commission person. Lots of possible reasons. They also were wondering what's happening to the press blocks. The second one that was up was the Butler block, which was the second topic that we, or the first topic actually that we discussed at our June meeting. The project has gone through some redesign. They lost the oriel windows, the basic, what most people would understand as a bay window. Their bay window goes all the way to the ground, and an oriel window stops short of going to the ground. Interestingly, the part of the discussion on the art tower came through to the Butler block, and the commission surprised me. They were talking favorably about the building being a little bit messier and a little bit more residential. I don't know where that's going to go, but it showed some recognition on the part of the design commission that Goose Hollow is a different place from the Pearl or from downtown. I took that as a good sign. Other discussions had more to do with how wide the mullions were between windows than it had to do with the impact of the building. There was one thing that came up that does affect the neighborhood strongly. That is whether or not the intersection at 17th and Salmon ought to be signalized or not. That's going to be a hot one. That's it.
One more.
Okay.
One
Yes,
more
Jerry.
that we discussed in our
Sorry,
meeting. I'll
Scott.
just be very quick. It was the retail store on the west corner of Providence Park. And so they're moving the timber store from where it is currently. That's going to be the Thorn store. And so now they need a new space for the timber store, and they're going to be moving it in kind of in that corner. So there's this public space, in that corner in the northwest corner of the timber stadium where the faces are. And I think that's kind of like the smokers area right now. And they're just going to build a structure there. It's going to be a one-story structure with kind of a tall roof, kind of at an odd angle. And it'll be mostly glass, almost look like an Apple store. And they're just going to have timbers wear there. So there was some discussion during the planning meeting about that particular space. They just wanted to get our view on whether they were headed in the right direction.
Yeah, they haven't put in an application yet.
It's just a question. Was the idea of the glass so that we would be able to see more into the stadium? Is that the thing you're talking about? No,
Well,
I'm
it's not
something
seeing
else.
into the stadium, but it is being able possibly to see through it to the stadium. But it is going to be covering up some of the historic, like arches and things like that, because it's going to be a structure outside of the stadium. But the idea is, yes, I think they were being encouraged to make it as transparent as
Yes.
possible. But keep in mind that although there's going to be a lot of glass around it, there's going to be a lot of clothing and, you know, banners hanging from the ceilings and things like that that could impact kind of visually the transparency looking actually through it, to the stadium beyond.
So are we gonna be able to look through it all at any other point?
Look,
Look into, so it won't be like all walled up, the stadium will be all walled off and you won't be able to see into it?
No, it's a little building,
Yeah.
it's a little building in a big space.
yeah, it's not gonna block your view of the stadium, but it will interrupt the view of the stadium because it is some structure, it can't be totally transparent.
Okay, let's keep moving because we only have 8 minutes and we need to get back to the letter. We have one last item on the agenda, which Roger and Eric is NWNW. Well, Roger, you weren't here. Eric, were you?
Yeah, and we partially discussed it earlier, where it seems like, actually, Steve from the Northwest Association had requested a letter that we had sent, I guess it was a year ago, and where we talked about transparency and what our bylaws are, and we got a lot of support, whereas, as I mentioned earlier, whereas before we were considered the outlier, now we're getting support from the Pearl, from Hillsdale, and the Northwest. So, excuse me, I think it'll be time will tell. Roger, I think, then responded to Steve that we had a second letter. We only discussed it really in the last 5 minutes and partially in other areas of the meeting, but we'll see what develops with that. So it's the 2 letters that we had sent out, what, a year ago? And
We sent one out early in 2017 after the audit, and then we sent another one in March, which we acted upon this February, and we sent out the 5th of March.
Okay,
And both of
so-
those are referenced in the draft letter.
Right, we have the links to them as well. By the way, it's City Council, COUNCIL. It's spelled in there. Ask for the general nature of these letters.
The letters that we had, as a board, had approved to send
The general
out.
nature of the letters was advocating, they were to City Council advocating the reform of ONI.
And then they also passed out these lovely booklets, Office of Community and Civic Life. And one of the things that I had mentioned, just quickly looking through it, I had said I don't see anything talking about neighborhood associations, and it was brought to my attention that on page 7, where they have all these colors, you know, graffiti and liquor and marijuana and alternative shelter, that we are listed under neighborhood program.
I think there's one, I think it's one of 20 items listed there.
Yes,
that
but
says
as I
neighborhood
say, they
program.
show crime prevention and neighborhood program as opposed to neighborhood associations. So again, it's a work in progress, but I think we have a lot more support within communities at NWNW than we ever had before. So